But I work with a company, Landscape Structures. We're based out of Delano, Minnesota. Delano is one of those super flashy places where about the only thing you can do is go grab lunch at the gas station. But a lot of really cool play comes out of there, and a lot of play ideology. It's a really forward-thinking location in the world of play space. And so my title there, what I work with, is I'm an inclusive play specialist. And so this is a really meaningful role to me, particularly because I was born with a disability. So I was born with spina bifida. I have used a wheelchair all of my life. And the world of play and the designed environment really allows what I can and can't do. And so there's just a lot of passion there for making that happen. And so again, I fell into this by pure dumb luck. I went to the University of Illinois myself, and I actually left U of I fully intent. I had a design degree and I wanted to redesign the urinary catheter. That was my big glamorous Kardashian moment in life. But what I ended up doing, I was at a conference, I was speaking on this importance of play and disability and how adaptive athletics was such a formative force in my life, that a manufacturer approached me afterwards and they wanted me to come to Minnesota to take a factory tour. They did it in July because they were really intelligent. And so I flew up here, I checked it out, and we had full conversations about this role of play. And I got an email a few months later saying, great, you're hired. And I said, awesome, for what? So we really got to construct this role on our own to be an inclusive play specialist, to talk to awesome groups like this about just the importance of play, as well as educating communities on how do we do it? How do we do this correctly? How do we make it happen? And how do we use this user voice that I've grown up with and implement it into everything we do? So disability in the realm of play has a very meaningful spot in my heart, and I get to use that every day.
I hear that 100%. Clearly, I also am a person that is a manual wheelchair user full time. I have been disabled since I was 12 years old when I woke up from a nap and I couldn't walk. So due to a spinal arterial venous malformation, which is a bunch of real fancy words for birth defect of veins wrapped around my spinal cord. So I have been a wheelchair user for 18 years, so it's a little bit different than Jill. However, my experiences are probably very much the same with inclusive play, or in our case, it's probably more exclusive play. Growing up, we're going to go into some of our experiences as wheelchair users on the playground in school. So Jill, can you kind of tell a little bit about some of your experiences as a wheelchair user growing up on playgrounds?
Or lack thereof. Yeah, so growing up, one of the most important things about this is, and I hate being definition-y on anybody, but disability is actually defined as the complex interaction between a person's body and the environment in which they're in. And so that's just simply to say of our ability to thrive isn't dictated by our personal physical ability, it's by what our environment allows us to do. And so the designed environment itself is it is a passion project because of this background in design, but also in disability. I remember all of the times growing up when the environment was the thing telling me, you can't be there. It wasn't my friends, it wasn't lack of interest, it was strictly the place, the spatial place created. It told me you're not meant to thrive, you're not meant to show up. I was a competitive little turd. I wanted to race, I wanted to play, I wanted to be involved in everything. I wanted to be with all the kids who were happening and making up these games. I had a wild imagination, but I couldn't. I couldn't partake in that because my wheelchair couldn't roll through the wood chips. My crutches I couldn't waddle through the wood chips. There wasn't a lot of things that showcased what I could do. I remember there was one parallel bar and I could hang upside down on it, and kids thought I was the coolest thing in the world to be able to do that. So, there was this one little thing that could highlight talent when, there's so many other opportunities to showcase what I'm strong at. So instead, I spent my school days, I would build houses for bugs in the planter pots by the building. And I was content with that. I didn't realize there was so much going on that I was missing out on. I didn't realize that this is where my friends were making tighter bonds with each other. This is where they were developing so many of those social and emotional skills. I was just up there with the bugs. So the designed environment itself, I think it dictates who's invited. And so when we design it in a concerted way, we're inviting everyone. And we're saying we want every single person to be here and to show their value.
Absolutely, because every single person in this world has value. Whether our society shows it or not, there is value in every single person. And some of my experiences, my school was the small school in the school district. When I first became disabled, they tried to tell us that they didn't have enough funds to make things accessible. And so we had to fight to make sure that I was able to fit into the bathroom, not alone be able to play on the playground. And so I sat by my little ramp that was part of this building that I could go into, because even the basketball court had tiny rocks on it, like that I would fall and trip on. And as a new wheelchair user, I was not very good at getting back up into my chair. So it was an ordeal if that happened. And then it made it even worse, with friendships and that weird kind of
it's awkward.
So
it's awkward. You don't want the eyes on you in a bad way. Because I remember when I would try to play, when I would try to crawl, people would trip over me or people would be stuck waiting behind me. And so, I mean, that's one of the biggest things I preach is we never want the child with a disability to feel like they're the obstacle. We don't want to put them in those awkward scenarios because that's a very specific thing for you to remember, but I understand that feeling.
I just remember, there's times when we were in college that I tripped on the quad and it was kind of an ordeal for me to get up just because of the way the slope was, and it was cold and other factors, and we had practice that morning, so I was tired. And so there's other elements within someone's life that has a disability. And so, but having those moments of feeling like, oh, I'm an other, I do not fit, is very, you remember that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether you have a disability or not, you will remember that kind of thing. So that kind of goes into the idea of universal design. How do we create spaces that is inviting for everyone within our communities?
That is a loaded question. But it's something that we're thinking more about. I think that's the best part about it is these conversations are now being considered way before the other moments happen. Like my big other moment in middle school, actually I didn't even register as an other moment. Everyone else did for me because I was late for school and there was not a curb cut in the accessible parking. And my mom was helping me into the building and she hit the curb cut wrong and she launched me out of my wheelchair. And so I'm still late. And so she's shuffling me back in and I'm shuffling back in. And little did I know the entire school saw that. And after that, all the teachers went, oh crap, we probably should have built her a ramp. And so that's kind of what's changed here, why I tell that story is because that was aftermath thinking. That was thinking of how do we make this better after we realized we messed up versus communities now are really going forward and thinking, they're putting this at the front of their minds. They're starting to think, okay, we want to ensure that there's value. We want to ensure that there's universal design. And they're thinking of all kinds of really creative ways to do that. And so a really great way to do that that we preach is just that investment in our parks, investment in universal play spaces. This one conveniently behind my head, this is actually one out in Colorado. And it's one that I really love because it doesn't look entirely inclusive, right? It doesn't look like it was designed for people with disabilities. But that's the beauty of what we're doing is that when we do it right, it doesn't look that way. It looks like just a really cool space to play. Look at surfacing. I mean, we really look at it in this holistic approach of how do we go beyond and support every single user with a disability here. We have a very convenient pie chart that we show everybody. It shows all of the scope of disabilities and what the ADA in the play space was designed for. It was designed for our orthopedic impairments. That's our wheelchair users, ambulatory impairments. That was 1% of our user base. So if we're relying on that to dictate how we design, we're missing 99% of our population, right? And so this is where we get into that realm of universal design of how do we make sure our friends with autism have a positive experience with sensory processing disorder, ADHD, even anxiety, of what can we do to support every kid on the play space to avoid those other moments, or at least give them a conducive solution. And so that looks like different things. It looks like providing a lot of sensory opportunities like spinning, like climbing, like zooming motion. What we've got going on in the background of my little head here, this is the We Go round. That's a really, really cool universal piece that has that seamless transition that anybody can fit on. This is great as a multi-generational activity for wheelchair users, and the unitary surfacing, just allowing us to traverse the space. And so this one, I show it off as a good example because this one was limited by budgets. They could not use unitary surfacing for the entire playground, but they were really intentional where they did. They made sure that if we have a wheelchair user here who's going to go down this slide, that they don't have to end up in wood chips when they get to the bottom of it. Are we going to put surfacing under the tallest climber? Maybe not, but we're going to make sure people who need this surfacing are able to use it deliberately. Again, just intentional design, thinking through a lot of what we want to do and a lot of what the design intent is and making sure we're intelligent about it.
Yeah, that's an amazing answer. It sparked the idea of the curb cut, honestly, because like you mentioned the curb cut being at your school. And I remember having this one day where I think it was like the second week that I came back from school after being in the hospital. I fell sideways off this curb because they put it in a small curb cut, but they should have done the entire thing. Yeah, the curb cut. So even just the idea of a curb cut where it was created because someone just wanted their friend to get to their store. And so they slipped them some money to make. Yeah,
it was a bribe, right?
Yeah.
It was totally created out of a bribe.
And it was hey, I want my friend to come here. So that use of privilege, that use of that allyship, being able to bribe the construction worker to put in just a little ramp. And then they noticed that people would frequent that street corner more often, or they'd go out of their way to get to that street corner because it was easier for them, or it was easier to make deliveries and other things. So if you work with accessibility as the forefront, instead of designing this giant, beautiful park and then thinking about accessibility after and slapping ramps on it and things like that. If you deliberately think about the process, like you said, where the slide is, I wouldn't even thought about putting stuff on the slide or by the slide, but you're exactly right. If you are budget constraints, there are ways around it. There's ways to be able to adapt and problem solve if you just stop and think and talk to people about it.
Yes, that is, I hope you didn't have a good thought because I'm about to interrupt you so crazy.
You do.
But that's one of the biggest things that I love in this field is designing with our users, is bringing people who have the voice, who can talk about what makes for a positive play experience and making sure they're heard. We have an awesome kid on our team. His name is Dash. He's got mad jokes. The first thing he ever said to me was, "Hello, my name is Dash. I'm faster than the kid from The Incredibles." And so, this kid was rad. I loved him. But we got a call. We met Dash because his mom actually called our company and she said, "Look, I'm not looking to buy a playground. I live in a community and I've asked them time after time, where is an inclusive space to bring my child? He's 3 years old. He uses a wheelchair. He's got muscular dystrophy. And they keep pointing out all these ADA compliant playgrounds and we get there and there's nothing for him to do. What do you do about it?" And so we had to educate her on what our role is as the manufacturer, but we took her on a plant tour. We made sure she sat in on our inclusive play sessions and seminars to see what we really preach. And most importantly, we invited them to go play. And so we took Dash to the playground. And that day, we got up to all kinds of antics. We had to play I Like to Move It from Madagascar on the bongos. And that does not translate at all. But we like to sing songs. And even if either of us couldn't climb the tallest climber, we had to figure out a way to get to it and write it into our narrative of okay, do you see the whale over there? We were camping. That was the story of the day. And he was mad at me because I forgot peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But that was our story. We were going on the playground. We were imagining the narrative of camping. But he stayed connected. That's a side pointer about Dash, but he stayed really in our process. We really valued his love of play and his mom's passion for it. And she wasn't angry. She wasn't ready to fight somebody for doing it wrong. She was ready to advocate and educate. This is what makes for a successful day for my child. And so we brought her into a lot of different product developments. They were a critical force while we were developing the accessible swing. And while we were doing this, Dash would try it out. He'd say, this thing needs more swishy swashies. And grown men would have to write that down. But it was that user, yes, swishy swashies, Exhibit A. But it was that user force, that user experience of like that was what was telling us how to evolve this thing. That was asking his mom, all right, well, as a parent, how do you feel like we can make him secure in this experience? Like if he's sitting down, how do you make sure that you don't feel like he's going to go flopping all over the place? And we were getting really rich feedback from her on what was going to work versus what was not going to work. And so I guess what I'm meaning is that just the power of designing with our user groups. Of like you said, we can design this phenomenal park, but when we think about inclusion as an afterthought, that's where things get dicey. We worked with a group. It was a designer. He had worked on an inclusive project before, so we thought he had it on lockdown. He designed this beautiful, beautiful, universally designed park. And he said the day after it opened, within a week, a bunch of families, tons of families had stormed his office saying, this is a great concept, but we can't use it because it was near water. There was a whole stream, there was a whole water feature, there was no fencing, and children with autism diagnosis tend to gravitate towards that. And so immediately this thing got crushed. So the guy said, I had no idea. I didn't even think of that. And they were luckily able to make changes. But that kind of opened his eyes up to asking the community, what do we need? What does support the needs of these users?
Absolutely. Being able to talk to the people who actually, the users that will benefit from it is key for, I feel like, every single industry. But almost feel like with individuals with disabilities, it's almost like there's that barrier, that like awkward, like kind of sense to be able to talk to individuals. That's like, I feel the awkward whenever I'm talking, unless I'm talking to an individual with a disability, then it's super casual. So I'm super glad that you're able to provide that service for our community.
I'm just loud. I'm really loud. That's about it.
Which is what we need, honestly.
Started with the Weesaw, and that is the multi-user seesaw. And it's pretty simple. It's got 4 seats, but it's seats with back support. And so it was this idea of growing this inclusive seesaw series into something more, which is a goofy sentence, and I love that I get to say that and be paid for that. So this grew, and this started to consider of an accessible merry-go-round of how do we grow that idea. And so that's where the We Go Round got created. And this thing was really cool to be a part of because there's so much value put into every aspect. This was one of those conversations where we really sparked this ideation of disability. The power of disability means choice. It means that we can experience autonomy and independence and decide where we want to go and how we want to use something. And so that was what was so critical about the We Go Round, is we could decide, are we the ones spinning it? Are we helping provide motion on the interior? Are we sitting back and letting other people? And then we took that energy and we kept that rolling for the swing. And so the swing, this was the holy grail of inclusive projects. Because existing swings in the market, the idea is great. I think we all know about wheelchair swings because we see some viral video of a kid really enjoying one. And so that sensation is amazing. They were meeting a need for it. But the challenge of this was they weren't technically compliant. Because if we think about a swing that is big enough to hold a wheelchair user, that's a steel battering ram. And if a child walks across that, like, yeet, they gone. And so this is something that's very unsafe to actually integrate into a play space. And so typically, if we see a wheelchair swing, it has to be fenced off. It has to be resistant to vandalism. So typically they have to have a key. The key has a code on it. So you have to call your park and rec department, get the code, get the key to unlock the other key, get that code, then unlock the swing and hope it works. And so I've only tried one of these once. I used to be a Team USA athlete. I competed on 2 occasions. I did marathons. I was not intelligent, but I did them anyway. And I couldn't push up onto this thing. I could not get my body propelled on because the steep was so slow. The slope was so steep. So my colleague had to help me on there, and I'm sitting on the swing. I'm facing away from the playground. No one can be in there with me. No other kids. Nobody's having fun with me. And this little kid just pokes his head through the jail bars and goes, "I don't think you're supposed to be on that." And I lost it. I was laughing so hard. I was like, this is literally the intended user. And so we started thinking about, how do we mitigate this solution? How do we achieve this sensation of swinging that people have brought to the table, but how do we integrate it? How do we make sure we can swing with our friends? And so as we went down this road, I mean, this was not a pretty road. Like, we created some contraptions as prototypes to try to achieve this swinging sensation. But so much of that was a road of discovery. It was discovering what was really important. We want freedom to maneuver. We don't want to have to be strapped down. We want to make sure that when we roll onto this thing, that our wheels have this freedom to rotate and to move around, and I can put myself wherever on this swing I want to be. However I need to figure out how to propel it, I can be there. We wanted to make sure that if somebody was backing into a space, that it was comfortable. So that was a lengthy discussion about just the texture of what you back into. And so you'll notice it's actually a soft belted material, so that A, reduces that impact danger that we talked about, but B, gives a wheel a spot to sit. And so it kind of creates a more comfortable place to be. And then how do we propel it? We had really long, lengthy conversations about how important it was to make sure that the user themselves could contribute, that we could be active participants and make this thing go. Because that's the power of play. We want to feel like we're doing something, that we're part of the ride, we're contributing to the narrative. And then lastly, we wanted to make sure that we could have that face-to-face experience, that other people were able to be there playing with us. And so that day, it was super cool because Dash was on one side, I was in the middle, we had this group of kids on the side. Dash is telling mad jokes. I was asking where everybody arrived from that day, and they kept telling me, well, one came from Florida, one came from Pluto, one came from Wisconsin. They lived all up the block. But I mean, it was fun just to have that experience where we were in a design environment that allowed us to speak this universal language that is play. If anybody has questions, I mean, feel free to reach out. Even just a discussion on inclusive play. I have the fortune of working with a lot of students who are just looking at this realm of accessibility and just people who want to know how to do better in their communities and in their parks. And so feel free to reach out. We're Landscape Structures. Play LSI is our website. But my email is jillmoore@playlsi.com, JILLMOORE@playlsi.com. I feel like a TV hotline person there. But yeah, just always excited and open to a conversation about play, and always have a lot of thoughts on it, as you can tell.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I'm trying not to say absolutely so much. I just agree with everything. So thank you so much for joining me today and talking about universal design and importance of accessible play. We do have some accessible parks at the park district, or an accessible park with accessible features. Eisner Park, which Landscape Structures is responsible for, which also has the WeGo Saw. We saw. I'm sorry, the We Saw. I'm all about the WeGo. The We Saw.
Love it.
And then also has like the spinny thing.
Omni-spin.
Yes, the Omni-spin. And I know
I want to make a quick aside about that, because that one, it's so cool. That was actually, again, a big part of the universal design discussion, because it went from not only is this at a transfer point, but can parents, if a parent is lifting a child with a disability out of it, how comfortable is it for that experience? So that was really, really cool too. And then also making sure everybody can face each other. When you're in this big spinning thing, being able to look at each other and again, participate in that play. So that was a part of a universal design discussion too. So I'm really glad you have that.
Yes, they're starting to pop up all over Champaign Park District. I know we have a new one in Kessel. We have one in Eisner. There's one, I believe, at West Side now. They're just starting I feel like just starting to pop up everywhere. So there, even if it's so important to have those, regardless of if the playground is deemed accessible or not, having some accessible features is better than having nothing.
Something for everyone, at least something.